So as I was thinking about how we should approach our marriage retreat and what it would be good for us to learn and to think about and to ponder, it seems to me that when we are experiencing the sacrament of marriage, we usually are not very conscious of what's happening. You know, like we're kind of just floating through it. It's such a busy day. We come to the church. We probably haven't eaten. You know, the future wife has put on a dress that, you know, she really can't breathe very well, and everything is very rushed, and we really are not in a frame of mind to reflect on what's happening. And so I thought it would be very good for us to go back through the marriage service and think about what it was that happened. How did the service affect us, and how did we interact with it, even if we weren't really all that conscious of it at the time. So that's what this talk is going to be about, and there'll be a lot of opportunity for back and forth and questions. If you hear something that doesn't make sense to you, raise your hand. You know, that doesn't bother me. I'm happy to have a conversation as we go along. So this may be helpful for husbands. If you want to have a little bit easier life, feel free to use this particular guidance. All right, the sacrament of marriage. So, what is a sacrament? A sacrament is a way that we interact with God, and His grace changes us. That's confession, that's communion, that's marriage, that's baptism, right? That's the chrismation, as we call it. That's ordination, that's unction. Those are the 7 that we sort of consider to be the standard sacraments. Although there's a lot of sacramental things in the Orthodox Church that don't necessarily get the name of sacrament. Like, for instance, the tonsure of a monk or a nun. When their name is changed, they wear different clothes. That's very sacramental. The funeral itself is quite sacramental. There's a lot of sacramental things. The Church does not limit itself to the 7 sacraments, but those are the ones that we kind of know and we're comfortable with. Well, marriage is one of those. When a sacrament happens, we are changed in an interior way. And that's why priests, for instance, wear different clothes, because they've changed in an interior way, and that's an exterior sort of expression of that. And all sacraments do this to us. So marriage is a sacrament. It changes us. We are not the same. Just as when a child is baptized, the child is not the same as before they were baptized. We are not the same after we participate in the sacrament of marriage. So why do we need the sacrament of marriage? I think the answer to that is here. Christian marriage differs from other religious marriages, and from non-religious marriages also. In Christianity, our marriage is a mutual support towards salvation. That is the one and only reason that we have marriage. In other religions, it's basically a legal arrangement. There are certain rights and responsibilities of each party. If each fulfills those, then the marriage is okay. If they don't, there are certain punishments or certain sort of negative things that go along with that. It has a very legal framework. Ours does not have this. Christian marriage does not have this. Christian marriage is a support. It is a way for 2 to become one, as we hear often in the marriage service. And its main goal is to help us to go towards our salvation. So, marriage is very, from a Christian point of view, is very, very unique. It's very exclusive. So, we have this word called bigamy. It means multiple marriages, right? Sequential bigamy, that is, someone is married once and then married later again, but not at the same time, being married to the same 2 people, is sometimes allowed. For instance, in the death of a spouse, or in sometimes, as Matushka mentioned, in cases of divorce. But simultaneous, that is, being married to 2 people, one man being married to 2 women, or one woman being married to 2 men, at the same time is never allowed. So, this is different than basically all other marriage, especially other religious marriage. Bigamy is kind of the standard of the world until Christ comes. Christ changes that standard. We are so used to the idea of marriage being 1 man and 1 woman that we don't even think about the fact that bigamy was the standard that existed pretty much before Christ. So, he talks about this in a very interesting part of the Gospel, in Matthew 5, where first he talks about, he gives the Beatitudes, he talks about other distinguishing characteristics of what a Christian is, And then he says this, "It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say to you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery." That's a pretty strong saying. In essence, what Christ is saying is that marriage is exclusive to one man and one woman, basically for the time that they are alive on the earth. Now we'll talk about a little bit about divorce, and that it is allowed by the church in certain circumstances, but it's extreme. That is an extreme exception. But we live in a throwaway society. You know, something doesn't work, we toss it. We don't bother to fix it, because if we're going to pay somebody to fix the TV, it's going to cost twice as much as the new TV anyway, so let's just buy a new TV. Or just you can insert anything in there for television. But no matter what it is, it's just cheaper to throw it out. And we get really used to just, oh, it doesn't work, I'll throw it out. Well, we can treat our marriages like that too, and often people do. Oh, you know, you're cute, I'm cute, let's get married. Oh, it doesn't work, let's throw it out. Let's go for another one. And it's very important for us as Christians to hold ourselves to a much higher standard. Right? So this is the standard that Christ is calling us to, a very high standard of marriage. All right. So the church has generally understood marriage as a mixture of eternal and temporal. All right? It has allowed divorce under certain very extreme circumstances, as I said, if it is more efficacious for a couple to save their souls apart than together. That is the only time that the church allows divorce, is that if somehow the two are more quickly bringing each other to hell than they are to the heavenly kingdom. That, and you know, Matsushka listed the various reasons, but that's the only time that the church basically allows this. It's interesting that the second and third marriage services are different than the first. They have a kind of a penitential character. And there's one very strong prayer that is read there, which is basically from St. Paul when he's talking about it's better to be married than to burn. Okay, so that's a very strong thing to be said in a marriage service. But this is the church expressing its teaching about marriage in the liturgical life of the church. A lot of times when you read something official that comes from the church, it will begin with a quote from Scripture, which is perfectly good. But I remember that Metropolitan Loris almost always, when he would send a Christmas epistle or some Paschal message or something like that, he would always start from some quote from the Divine Service. Because as he taught us as students, this is the church's theology in action. And so it's not that it's better than quoting from Scripture, but the reason I bring that up is, for us it's important to understand what happens in the church is not just some kind of dance. It is a very important expression of our faith. And we interact with theology, we interact with our faith during the divine services much more than we do outside of them. Very few of us read a lot of spiritual books. Some read read a lot, but most don't read many. And so our greatest interaction with the church, our greatest learning and teaching takes place in the divine services. And so when the church makes such a change as having the first marriage be one thing and the second and third marriages be something else, it's something that we should pay attention to and understand. And something that you probably know but may not know is that deacons and priests may not marry a second time. Or if you want to think about it this way, someone who's married can become a priest, but someone who's a priest can't get married. You're already either married or you're not. Once you put on the black dress, your choices are you remain as you are or you remain as you are.
So you don't need to get married before you, I mean, I heard something that you have to get married
before you right. So once you're a priest,
but you don't have.
You can't get married. You can't change your station in life. Either you're a priest and you're already married, or you're a priest and you're not. John.
Can you be in the white clergy and just be a bachelor?
So to be celibate, that's a good question. There are very few celibate clergymen. Either the clergyman makes a commitment to the family with his wife that he makes, or the family that he joins as a member of the brotherhood in a monastic community. And this keeps people from being sort of free actors without any connection. There are always a few in the church unmarried priests who are not monastics, but it's rare. That's the exception and not the rule. And usually that person is on their way to becoming a monastic, so that they have the grounding of that monastic community as their family, so that no one is sort of floating without an attachment to a family, be that their earthly family or their brotherhood that they belong to. That's a good question.
What if somebody was married just outside the church, and then they enter the church, can they get remarried?
You mean like if they want to be a priest?
No, just...
Yes, yes. The church looks at marriage probably in a much broader way than we usually understand that. In the early Christian times, there were a lot of different ways that marriage was approached. Now we pretty much exclusively look at marriage in the church as the sort of legitimate marriage, and others as not. But it's not that clean. It's not that clear. There is actually a service that is to be used for those who have been married a long time without a church wedding, and that's a very short service where a couple of prayers are read, and it's kind of like a blessing on the marriage that they already had. And that can be done. But also to experience the full marriage service is perfectly legitimate and good. And many people do that as well. So you can be married outside the church and then come to the church and receive your marriage, and that's, I would argue, a good thing. Yeah, it would be great to have the church marriage first, but if you don't, you should come to the church and have the marriage blessed.
Well, what if somebody was married outside the church for like 10 years because he or she was outside the church,
Mm-hmm.
and then they got divorced maybe 2 or 3 times? Can they still be part of the church? Is that going to be considered their first church marriage?
It depends on the situation exactly, but if that person was married and divorced outside the church and then came to the church, that person can get married in the church, absolutely. And it wouldn't count as like you've already had your 3 chances and you're done. But at the same time, the priest would counsel the person about, if there's this history of kind of getting married and divorced, the priest would counsel the person about the way that the church looks at marriage. This is not just something that's broken, I throw it away, but that we try to fix it.
So it can still be...
You can absolutely still be married in the church.
The same person that Dimitri is talking about with regards to married outside the church, and they came to the church, legitimate marriage, everything's good. Depending on the circumstance, could they become a cleric?
It depends. Yeah, it's not impossible. Because mostly if they had been married to one person, even if they were outside the church for a long time. If they had sort of been married to 8 or 10 people, probably not. But if that person had been married to one person for all their life, and then they find the church, that's not necessarily an impediment.
I mean, because there's a lot of people, going through divorces and then coming to church.
Right.
As a result, just want to start a new life.
Absolutely, and the church does not say to them that you're not eligible to be married in the church. No, they are, absolutely. And we want people to look at the church as a new life. That's a very good point. Olga.
Well, what were you talking about, 3 chances?
So in general, the church allows people to, at most, be married 3 times in their lifetime.
So that doesn't count like what Dimitri was
Right.
talking about prior?
That's right. But again, if someone has a history of being married and divorced many times, then when they are married in the church, the priest will spend a lot of time counseling about the indissolubility of marriage, how the church looks at marriage as a very serious lifetime commitment. Good question. John?
So the church will give you no more than 3 wedding ceremonies?
In general that is true. There's always exceptions, but in general that's true. It depends on how that came about. A very unfortunate person a woman is married, she has many children, husband dies, there's a famine. And then she gets married again, husband dies because he got sick. She gets married again, husband gets hit by a car. It's not that that there's divorces that are happening, she's just had an unfortunate set of circumstances. Now, who is the next person to marry her, I don't know. Someone with a lot of faith, I think, and trust in God's providence. But nonetheless, that would probably be allowed. It's just that after those 3 marriages, only the bishop can bless the
Sounds like
first
the
one.
Pharisees that were asking about it.
Exactly. Yes.
The 7th.
Exactly. So after the 3, it could happen. You could be married again, but you would have to have the bishop's blessing.
So you don't need to go to Vladika for a 3rd marriage?
I often do, but strictly speaking, we wouldn't have to. Vladika likes to kind of know what's going on in the parishes. For instance, when we have, in our diocese, if someone wants to be married and one spouse is Orthodox and the other one is not, Politica likes to bless that. He follows the priest's recommendation, but he wants to know what's happening. So that's just the way that he manages things, and I think it works quite well, actually. Good. Any other questions about this little piece?
Why we're so interested in counting marriages? Marriage couples.
Always have to have your options.
That's right. You want to keep your options open. No, I think we said it was very extreme circumstance that we will not.
Watch out for the mushrooms during fast.
So, the marriage service. The marriage service as we know it today, as is practiced in the Orthodox Church today, actually comprises two different services. One is engagement or betrothal. The other one is the crowning or the marriage proper. Right? So we'll go over that a little bit. So betrothal. That's what happens in the back of the church. Right? Or if you're Serbian, it happens in the front. It's kind of interesting. We do our betrothals in the back. The Serbs do it actually right up in front of the altar, and then they move into the middle of the church. But that doesn't work for part of my presentation later in the metaphor I'm going to use. So that's just for your information. But in general, in the Russian church, it's done in the back of the church. The betrothal bestows all the responsibilities of the marriage on the couple. So it counts. If you're betrothed, but you don't finish the marriage service, it counts actually as being married. This happened to a seminarian when I was at school. He wanted to be betrothed to his fiancée, and all of us to a person said, don't do it. There's no upside to this. You get none of the benefits of marriage, you get all of the responsibilities of marriage. But he would have no part of it, and they were betrothed, and then she left him. And it counted as a first marriage. So if he wants to be ordained, he'll have to become a monk. He can't be a married priest now, because if he gets married in the church, that counts as a second marriage. The betrothal counts as the first. So it's something serious. That's where the rings are exchanged, and we'll talk a little about that. But first, at the beginning of the betrothal service, candles are given. So everybody remembers this. I bring candles to people. Sometimes you get fancy candles made. It doesn't really matter. And these candles symbolize the warmth and faith and love of God. All right? Then rings are given. This shows us how eternal the nature of marriage is, right? A ring has no beginning and no end. An interesting point is that the divorce does not necessarily destroy the first marriage. In fact, it doesn't. It just expresses the reality that it no longer functions for the purpose that it was designed to. It doesn't help with salvation. So, the promise of the ring. We talk about Joseph in Egypt, right? We all remember Joseph. He was put into the pit, right? But ended up saving all of his family in Israel. Daniel in Babylon, the prodigal son, was also given a ring. Ring has a very strong Old Testament symbolism to us. And it symbolizes something that's very, very strong, something that's very intense, something that means a lot, that has a great power and has a lot of implications. Now, we always put the rings on the right hand. A lot of times in America, people wear their ring on their left hand. But during the service, we put it on the right hand. The reason for this is that in Scripture, right is always symbolizing good, right? Remember when Christ comes, the sheep will be on the right and the goats on the left, right? When Moses parted the Red Sea, he used his right hand and his staff, right? Everyone knows he opened the sea like this and he closed it like that. What does that look like? Cross, that's right. And there are many other images in Scripture, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, where right signifies good. So it doesn't mean you're bad if you wear your ring on your left finger. Nobody's going to punish you or you don't have to pay a fine. But it's more traditional to wear it on your right hand. I think the left is because it's closer to the heart, which is very romantic, but the right has to do with Scripture and the sort of concept of right being good. John?
So left-handed people are okay?
Left-handed people are okay. They can have a place in the heavenly kingdom. Absolutely. It's just that symbolism, so it doesn't mean that they're bad. All right, so betrothal. This is what it looks like. This is where it happens in the back of the church. Crowning. Okay. So after the betrothal, which takes, let's say, 15 minutes. It's not a very long part of the service. Then we come into the middle of the church and we begin the second service, which takes place under the umbrella of the marriage service, which is the crowning. Now, this is the first steps that the couple takes as a betrothed couple, after they've exchanged rings, as they already have made a commitment to each other, the first action together is to draw nearer to God's altar. I think that's a very powerful metaphor. I think it means something, and it's very important for us. It sets the example of our future life together, that together we will draw nearer to God throughout life. Now, this is where we say something. In the Orthodox Church, the statements are made at this part of the service, once you come into the middle of the church. The oath is not given to each other, which I think is so interesting. The oath is given to God. When you take an oath about your marriage in the church, you actually don't even look at each other. Everything is done to God. So, there are two questions asked. Have you freely decided to enter into this marriage? We think that's kind of funny and old-fashioned, and in a way it is a little old-fashioned. But, that wasn't always the case in the old days. Sometimes people were getting married for the wrong reasons, because, they liked the field that the next door family had, and they wanted to get that field, and therefore they gave the daughter, and, so that was a really important question. And then, have you promised to wed only this one person? Another, we think it's so silly, how could that not be the case? But that was a very important question in the old days, when sometimes marriages would be arranged, and sometimes people were running away, and it was a really significant question. So these things to us seem just like a perfunctory thing, but they actually have really great meaning and are very important for us. In our days, it helps us to focus on the fact that marriage is an indissoluble union. John, you have a question?
No.
Okay. Yes, Father John.
Clarify, no, we're using the word oath. I was always taught there was promise. Could you intertwine the two maybe in that, or no, or is it oath?
Well, that's fine. You can use promise. It's in Russian we'd say kliatva, which to me is both. But you could call it also a promise. Matsuka, you had a question?
What I love is we don't promise anything except that. We don't promise to love, honor, and obey. The church says, we promise that we really want to be married, and the church says, look at how to do it.
Right.
But we do, and the other thing is we don't have to write our own vows, and that saves us from just so much tackiness.
Right, exactly. The husband cannot blame the wife for what was written, and the wife cannot blame the husband because it was written, by the church. So.
Do you think that actually ever been used as an exit from the marriage?
I think
As
probably
for,
yes.
Like freely decided to enter into marriage? No, and she's leaving, right?
And that's the end.
I think it was actually.
That's the end of the service right there. So yeah, I'm sure. But there are also a lot of there would have been a lot of societal pressure on that person. Okay, so she's leaving, then what?
And she'll
in those days, right? In those days, it's not like she went out and got a job. In an agricultural society, now she's shunned. So I'm sure absolutely that it happened, but it's a difficult thing. But the church will not marry someone who is not freely entering into the marriage. You have to voluntarily enter into the marriage.
To say it.
Yes. This is, the undergirding of our faith is our free will, and here the church is expressing that. So if you aren't freely entering into this, then we're not doing it. Okay. Then after the interaction with the priest, then there's a lot of prayers referencing Old Testament saints and Old Testament marriages, which is all quite interesting actually, and a good refresher for us from our Sunday school courses. But then the temptation from that is for us to begin to see New Testament marriage as the same as Old Testament marriage. In the Old Testament, they were getting ready for the Messiah. Having children was the most important thing. In the New Testament, that's not the case. Messiah has been born. Having children is great, and the church hopes that we will have children because children help us with our salvation also. But that's not the point of the New Testament marriage. John, or whoever you are, Don.
Based on what you said, that they're actually at the betrothal, they're already married, why wouldn't those questions be in the betrothal where you can actually stop it? Because now, from what you said, they're actually already officially married.
Yeah, that's a very good question. In essence, the services are designed to be served together, but if they were served apart, I've never done one apart, I actually would ask those questions at the betrothal, because otherwise it's nonsensical. You're absolutely right. Because otherwise they're saying nothing and just exchanging rings and aren't making any commitment. So yeah, If for some reason I would only do that if the bishop told me that I should serve it separately for some reason. I would ask those questions. I think that's a very good point.
And you can modify it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, in that case, I would ask his blessing to do it, but I'm sure he would say, absolutely, it doesn't make any sense to
Right.
just exchange rings without making any commitment. Absolutely. John?
So in Orthodoxy, there was no like historical case where the betrothal preceded like by years or a long time the actual marriage, like 9-year-olds were betrothed or. and then they got
Actually, there's a
married?
canon about who can be betrothed and wed, and for girls, the minimum age is 14, and for boys is 16, which seems kind of young for us now.
That's from one of the.
It's from one of the ecumenical councils. So we believe that was generally the practice in the ancient world, even in the church before that. But we couldn't say that that was never. Those ages were never violated, but that's the general accepted minimum, is a girl to be 14 and a boy to be 16. And if you think about it, if you live in a society where the life expectancy is in the 40s, that kind of makes some sense. In our society, that doesn't make any sense, right? We wouldn't do that, and there are even laws against it. But yes, but there are sometimes when someone is betrothed for a long time beforehand, but it's rare because, as I said, you get all the sort of downside and none of the upside.
So the two parts will always happen together, pretty
In
much.
general, they would have happened together as a rule, or been served very closely together. Within weeks probably.
Is it the same age to be betrothed to God, like to become, nun?
You have to be 14
or
to be a
monastic.
monastic?
Yeah, I believe the age is the same. That's a good question, and it makes sense if you think about it.
Right.
Didn't in Russia, right after Sviatki, before the great fast, there was a betrothal, and then people got married after the.
That may be the case. I don't know that. That may be the case. And what I often tell to couples, if they haven't already been married for a long time and are coming to the church, they should be together as a couple, not live together, but be together at least through one cycle of the year of the church services, of the church life. Because if you can't manage to go through the fast together without killing each other, you're probably not going to have a good marriage. And I just tend to not be one that is really in favor of short engagements, but that's me. So I think the ideal is that we at least go through 1 year of coming to church together, living a Christian life together, going through the fast together before we are married. And that helps. If you fast with somebody for a year, if you kind of are interacting with them on a spiritual level for a year, there's no way you will not know that person in a very intimate way. So, okay, good questions. So, crowning. So when the crowns are given, then you are a king and a queen for the day, right? I mean, how many people I've heard say that, and I just laugh at it. These are martyrs' crowns. These are martyrs' crowns. And they remind us that we have to martyr ourselves to each other in order to have a successful marriage. That is, we have to give up our own will to the other in order to have a successful marriage. Right before the crowns are given, the 40 martyrs of Sebastian are mentioned in the prayers. There are very few saints of the New Testament that are mentioned in the prayers of the marriage. Most are from the Old Testament, but these are specifically mentioned. And everybody I think knows this story, right? There were the 40 martyrs who were put into the water, into the lake near Sebastian. It was freezing, and the soldiers built fires on the shores and tried to tempt them to come in. And one came in, and then the 40 crowns came down from heaven, and one of the soldiers decided to go take that 40th crown. Right? Everybody remembers that. So this is the reminder to us that the crowns that we receive in marriage are the crowns of martyrs. That we have to martyr our will to the other person, and if we do that, then our marriage will be successful.
That's not in the New Testament. Is it?
No, it's after.
No, but I mean it's in the New
Okay.
Testament period. I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Not from the New Testament per se, but in the New Testament period. Good point. Okay, then we get to the epistle reading. Now, this is from Ephesians, the 5th chapter. Men and women tend to hear this differently.
Yeah.
Right? Men always boys hear this part, and especially teenage boys really hear this part very well. And the wife see that she reverence her husband, or that that she submit to her husband. Depends on the translation that you use. In King James, it's reverence. And here is a picture of someone who doesn't understand what that means. He's telling his wife, that she has to submit by serving him. This is not what we mean. Women often hear this. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. So men hear the submit part, and the women hear the part where the husband has to love his wife as much as Christ loved the church. So in this case, gentlemen, I'm sorry, but the women are right. How much did Christ love the church? So to make this clear, St. Paul goes on. He says, so ought men to love their wives as their own bodies, because he that loves his wife loves himself also. No man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it even as the Lord of the church. So that we understand God loves the church as much as we love our own bodies. And unfortunately, we love our own bodies very much. So this helps us to understand how this epistle reading applies to us. So let's see, I think we talked a little bit about it more, and we do. We should understand marriage as a partnership, right? Couples should work together to solve problems. Everything that comes up in married life. It's true that the husband may need to lead in the marriage, but he might even have to make a decision where he can't reach a consensus with his wife. But that should be rare. That should be after much talking and much discussing and much debating and much going back and forth. It shouldn't just be, imperial edicts are being sent out from the dining room table. This will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen. That's not the point. The point is that the vast majority of the decisions that we reach in a marriage should be reached by consensus. Now, we don't have to have a big, sit-down, difficult discussion about what color dress your wife is wearing today. In fact, I would say it's probably better to not comment on that at all. But when it comes to really serious things, are we moving to this place? Are we going to school here? Where are the children going to school? How many children are we going to have? Hopefully that happens before the marriage. Those are the kind of discussions that need to be had together and where a consensus needs to be reached. Questions? Do you have a question, John?
It's all clear.
Wise, very wise man. Wise man. All right. Now, after the epistle reading in the service, remember we're walking through the service, we get to the gospel reading. Here we have the wedding in Cana of Galilee. So this is Christ's first miracle. This is not a random thing, right? He could have done his first miracle anywhere. He chose to do it there. That tells us something. This is like the marriage of one of the apostles. His divine participation and blessing is very significant for us. It shows us that marriage has a place in the New Testament. And when I say that, you say like, duh, of course marriage has a place in the New Testament. I mean, who would think otherwise? Well, actually, there was a huge debate in the early church about whether marriage had any place in the New Testament. Because Christ was coming again, so we should not, this is something that was for the Old Testament, to prepare for the Messiah. What do we need marriage for? And so there was a big debate, and it took actually a long time to work this all out. So the church has always blessed marriage from the time of Christ. But there have been groups that have left the church because they felt that marriage was not appropriate to a Christian. Yes?
There was a couple that went to Budica Andre of Novodevievo for advice. And they didn't have any children. And he said, why do you not have any children? And the husband said, we're living in the last days. And in the Bible it says, woe to you that are with child. And he said, we don't know when the last days will be. The next time, come see me in a year and bring your baby with you. And they did. So
right. So I think that in the early times of the church, it was even more of a boiling question. So it's important, and of course God foresaw that it would be a temptation to some, and therefore he performed his first wedding at a marriage and blessed marriage as a state for Christians. John?
Have the fathers ever speculated about who the apostle was who was getting married?
Actually, I think we kind of do know who it is, but I don't remember which one it was.
I
I'd
think
have to
it
look
was
it up.
Simon.
I think it was Simon too. So I think there's a pretty good feel for who it was, but we aren't saying absolutely because it's not stated.
Simon, but not Peter. Peter was
Right.
Sorry, the other one.
not married.
Correct. Then we get to the common cup. Now, we use pure wine in the common cup. Sometimes it happens that for whatever reason somebody can't drink wine. It's not a huge big deal. The wedding is still legitimate. But in general, we use pure wine. At one time in the history of the church, and this was a short time, the wedding service was integrated into the divine liturgy. Right? So that cup is that is a residual of the time when the couple would commune together. We can still do this, and occasionally it's done, but very rarely. And it's probably better that it's not. It's just a really complicated thing. So, in general, the weddings are served outside the divine liturgy, and the common cup symbolizes that we experience as a couple all the joys and all the sorrows of life together. That we just don't say, well, I'll take the top, I'll take the first sip of wine, but I'm not gonna live life to the end with you. I just want a little sip of this and have some pleasure, and then I'm off. Well, the point is very significant, and you see even the priest will take the cup and turn it upside down and show that there's nothing left in it. That this is a very strong commitment, that both of the members of the family are committing to living life together to the end, no matter what happens. So this is, even though we don't really see this as that significant, this is a very significant part of the service. No words are spoken, but there's a significant promise that is being made here. Then after that comes the procession. So the first steps of the married couple together. If for some reason, lightning bolt struck down the priest from above for his sins, the couple would still be considered married after the walk that they take together. The procession is around the gospel. There's always an icon there, and we kind of think, oh, we're walking around the icons that we will hang in our house. How nice is that? Well, it's actually not what's happening at all. What's happening is that we are walking around the gospel, which is laid out in front of the icons, and we are doing this because the Word of God should be the center of our lives together as Christians. If we're a Christian married couple, then the gospel is the center of our life, as it is for every Christian. But it shows that we are together making this commitment, not just the husband takes a walk and then the wife takes a walk and then we're done. Together, you take your steps around the gospel. Then we get to the point of the removal of the crowns. Now, in our days, we remove the crowns right at the end of the service. But in the ancient days, marriage was an 8-day festival that took place usually in the village, and the couple would wear the crowns for those 8 days. They did not wear crowns like that for 8 days. Okay, that's something that the Slavs added to the church. That is really more like what the crowns were that they wore. Something like a laurel wreath or something like that. But if you think about how significant a wedding is in a village, two families are being wed together, not just a girl and a boy. Two families are being wed together. And when you think about the fact that, two other families had wed together to make that family and so on and so forth, in a village, that's like you're related to almost everybody. And so it's a huge festival that's going on there. And so for 8 days, there would be this feast, and then on the 8th day, the couple would come back to the church, and the prayers would be read, and the crowns would be removed. Sometimes the prayers are not even read in our days. I read the prayers. Not all the priests do. It doesn't mean that I'm better. It makes more sense to me that we would read the prayers at the removal of the crowns. Let's see. So that's basically what I say.
So the village is like what, 3rd, 4th century Asia Minor, or?
I think that continued even farther on into the church, into the maybe 8th, 9th century. By the time, and in Russia too, as far as I know, that practice continued. So it was probably into the 10th, 11th, 12th century before that slid. In Russia, it's a month. That's after 8 months, there are a couple of returns.
No more problems.
Okay, so
I have a question.
yes.
So, part of your vestment, right, that goes in front, that you cover hands to walk, right? It's the same part that when we confess, right? So what is that?
It shows the significance of the blessing of the church. That the wedding is being served, and God's grace is being called down upon the couple, but that God has, in His wisdom, has decided that should happen through the servants of the church, through the priests. And a bishop can service a wedding also, but it's unusual. So either a priest or a bishop could serve a wedding. So it just shows that the blessing, just like, you know, if for some reason the priest didn't put his tracheel on your head and read the prayers at confession, it would still count. The same thing would happen, you know, when I get old and I forget and I just grab the hands and walk around. It's still going to count. But this shows that the grace is coming through the priesthood according to God's plan. Makes sense? Okay, so that's the service. What I'm hoping we'll do is reflect a little bit on the Christian attitude towards marriage. As we said in the Old Testament, it was about preparing for the Messiah to come and about having children. And that's what we hear a lot about in the Old Testament. And there was bigamy in the Old Testament, right? One person had multiple wives. Not always, but sometimes. In the New Testament, it's about the mutual help of the couple on the path to salvation, and about the salvation of those that enter into the marriage and those that come from the marriage, that is, the children. So what's the implications of this? What does it mean that our main job in marriage is to help each other save our souls? So, we need to pray together. It's not sensical for a couple to be trying to save their souls together and to never pray together. It doesn't mean you pray together every minute of the day. That's not what I'm saying. But we need to pray together sometimes. We should start small if we don't do this. 1 or 2 times a week. Maybe Sunday evening is a nice time because we've kind of spent our Sunday anyway in worshiping God. But we need to aim high. We need to find a way to pray together regularly. As always, it's about quality, not quantity. Right? It's much better to pray together for a few minutes and pray well than to pray together for 20 minutes and be thinking about what children are burning down the house and what are we having for dinner, and you know, that's not useful. So always go for quality. The children should also be included. Where are they going to learn to pray if they don't learn from you? On the street? You know, from the television? Oh, I hope not. So we need to teach the children to pray. But it doesn't mean that the husband and wife don't need to pray together themselves, right? The kids are not going to be standing, especially when they're small, for long prayers. They're not. But can we not go to the crib and have the child stand up in the crib and say Our Father together and then bless the child before they go to sleep? It's like 30 seconds, but the imprint on the child is last a lifetime. But we ourselves also need to pray as a couple together, and we also need to pray apart. We need to have some time when we are praying to God, not together. But it is important to pray together. So make it a goal for yourselves to do that on some basis. Each couple is different. Some will want to pray together, you know, all the time. Some just once in a while. But the key is to have that. That is a very intimate expression of our love together when we pray together. So it's very important for us, and it will strengthen your marriage. Go to church together. It's important to pray at home, but Christ established the church, and it's important for us to be together with others to pray as well. And especially the children need strong Christian role models. It has to be us. We can't take them to church and say, watch that guy, I'm going to go out in the car and listen to the ball game. We have to be the one who's in the church, but we need to be there in order for that to happen. It's important to attend the evening services on some regular basis. We understand that is not going to be every Saturday for every little kid. That's fine. But it can't be never. That's a real commitment that children feel. They get the fact that we go to church on Sunday. A lot of their little friends go to church on Sunday too. That's still part of America. It may not be for our grandchildren, but for us and for our children it is, at least. And so that's not a big deal for them. That's just like, well, Sunday we went to church. But when we make a commitment to do a little more, it doesn't have to be a lot more, a little more, that makes a huge impression on them. They see that we're doing a little something more than just the average Joe Christian, and that makes a big impression on the kids. What is important for us to remember is that children do what we do. They imitate what we do. They do not do what we say. I mean, they might, if you have a piece of candy and say, will you do this? Of course, they'll do it. But in the long view, we have to be the role models for the kids. They're going to do what we do. We can't not go to church and then say, you go to church. I'm not going, but you go. It's never going to work. We need to serve together and support each other in our service. So the Lord came to serve and not to be served, right? That's right out of the gospel from the time when he washed the apostles' feet. And Peter refused to have his feet washed at first. And Christ said to him, I came to serve and not to be served. That's not really an optional thing for us. So we need to find ways to engage in service to others. And we need to find ways to mutually support each other. There's no law, either spiritual or secular, that says that the husband cannot watch the children while the wife is doing some other good Christian thing. It doesn't have to be every day for 6 hours, but can it not be once a month for an hour? You know, so we need to support each other in our service to others. We need to do other acts of good work, right? We need to take pilgrimages. Again, it doesn't have to even be every year, but once in a while.
And you don't have to take the kids to the pilgrimage?
Well, you could, but I'm not saying that the children shouldn't go, but we ourselves need to, again, be the role model for the kids. As I say here, be the Christian that you want your grandchildren to be, because if you do a lot of talking and not a lot of living that life, your children will adopt the way you live. But if you live a Christian life, your children will adopt that, and then your grandchildren will as well. So we always have to remember that it's not just our kids we're influencing here, it's our grandchildren. Confess and commune together. This is probably the most important thing that we can do as a couple. This helps us to remember the reason for our marriage, the mutual salvation. That's what we're striving for, and this is the way that we come closest to God. So we all have the opportunity to do this today. After, we're going to have some small group sessions after lunch, and then we're going to all read the prayers together to prepare for communion. So what a great opportunity. You don't even have to read your prayers. All you have to do is listen, and we'll read the prayers together, and everybody will have the opportunity to confess today and commune tomorrow. So, a final word from St. Paul. So whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as it is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Questions? John.
Okay, so you hear sometimes about renewing your vows. I know it's not the Orthodox thing per se, but I mean, could we do something like, what could we substitute for that?
So, that's a really good question, and generally what we do is we, on some anniversary, you know, some significant anniversary, probably 10, 15, 20, 25, whatever, come to the church, we serve a big Thanksgiving Malevin, we get the whole choir, we invite a bunch of people, and we just do a huge big service with the husband and the wife standing in the middle of the church, and then we have a reception, and it's kind of like having a wedding again, but what we're doing is basically thanking God for the life that he's given us and striving to continue to live in that life.
Our son and his wife just did that for their 25th anniversary. They had a Thanksgiving Malevin in the church, and downstairs they had a trapeza with champagne, and they brought out the wedding albums and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and in fact, it's basically doing exactly the same. So,
Does it have to be the 10 years or more of marriage in church, or?
Oh, I don't think
I
that.
think you can do it anytime you want.
Yeah, there's
You
no.
have to want to thank God it's not a bad thing.
That's right. That's right. There's no rules about that. Good question. Any other questions about what we talked about? Well, thanks everybody for being attentive. In a few minutes, we'll have our lunch, and then let's see. I'll quickly tell you what the schedule is for the rest of the day. Okay. Yeah, I think this is a good time to take a picture of everyone together. So today we have lunch at 12:30, which is in a couple of minutes, and we have a long lunch so that people have the opportunity to interact and talk with Matushka, who came all the way from Connecticut to be with us. And then at 1:30, we'll have small groups, and we'll break the men and the women up into small groups. 2:30, we'll wrap up and have any other questions and answers, and then we'll begin our prayers before communion at 3:30. All right, any questions? All right, so thank you everyone.